said howdy. You like howdy? Well, howdy.
I recorded that, so we can use that later.
All right. You ready?
I'm ready.
Well, welcome along to this very first episode of this podcast. My name is Kendall McDonald, and I'm the pastor here at Fredonia Hill, and I'm sitting alongside Blake Russell, our worship pastor, who's going to be our co-host for this podcast.
That's correct.
And we just wanted to step into this space so that we could have further conversations around all sorts of different topics. We don't have necessarily one thing in mind, but our hope was to be able to use this platform as a way of having different nuanced conversations about the intersection of life and faith, maybe about the things that are going on in the wider culture. And we want to be able to do that in the context of friendship. And I can tell you that my life has been changed by having conversations with friends about what God is doing in my life and about the challenges that I'm facing and about the things that I'm thinking about. And so we wanted to be able to model what discipleship and friendship looks like in some of these conversations. And we also wanted to give you a chance not only to get to know us a little bit more through this, but also to get to know some of our different staff members and even people from the wider community. So I think one of the things that we would like to do in this podcast is do some interviews with some people in our community. God is doing some cool things in and around the Nacogdoches area and want to hear from several of those people. So we've got all sorts of exciting things in store for this podcast. But we would love to hear from you as well. We want you to be able to tell us what you're interested in hearing. Are there any topics or issues or things that you'd like to hear us chat through a little bit more? We would love to certainly hear from you. But one of the things that we've talked a ton about here lately is the necessity for us to share our stories with one another, that we need to listen to what God is doing in one another's lives and share our stories with one another. So we figured that was a really good place for us to start, is just to talk about our backgrounds, to talk about how our past experience, our church life, our life of faith, our families, how those things have formed us into who we are today. So we're going to begin by sharing our stories a little. Start by just talking through things with Blake and his background. He's got some. Actually, he's going to tell this story, I think. But the Eagles played a major role in Blake's
my development as a worship leader in church music.
Yeah, the Lord used the Eagles to call Blake to ministry, I think, is something how that story goes. Anyway, so just talking through background. Anything else you want to say on the why we're even doing this?
We're doing it because Kendall wanted to do it. That was no. I think it's a good opportunity to kind of get to know us a little bit better and just to kind of hear where we come from. I think that will help build a little bit more of a connection between us and just furthermore kind of promote the idea that we're a family and we need to know each other. And so that's the hope.
Yeah, that's all my hope.
I use the word hope anywhere I possibly can. Don't forget to go to Apple Music and Spotify and listen to All My Hope from Fredonia Hill.
Written by Blake Russell and Fredonia Hill Band. Okay, so give us a window. I mean, I already kind of set that up a little bit with the Eagles.
We won't lead off with the Eagles.
Okay.
So most people will know that I am from Nacogdoches, so my roots run very deep in this community. And I'm going to say it. People laugh at me every time I say it, mainly Kendall and my wife, Ashley. But our family has been here. The Russell family has been here in Nacogdoches County since the 1830s, and so we have a deep heritage in this community. So I grew up here. I went to, for most of my life, I went to a small church outside of town, about half a mile from where we lived, and that was my perspective of church music, was the Heavenly Highway hymnals. I've actually got one sitting over there.
It's true.
It's true. You cannot see it, but it's sitting on my writing desk because I was working on a song a couple weeks ago, and I thought, man, it would be great if it sounded kind of like songs did whenever I was a kid. So, and that's the direction we went with it. But anyway, so Heavenly Highway hymnals, shape notes, all those good things. A lot of you, if you grew up in a similar church, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. But everybody that was singing on Sunday morning, which included the entire congregation, would sing a part. And so there's, you've got four parts, and you've got the guys singing the real low bass notes, and the lady singing way up high, and then they would repeat a line, and so that's really where I kind of developed my love for music, but also just being able to pick out harmonies and what singing was like in church.
Well, I think you got to stop. I mean, hang on.
Yeah.
For those of us that have not experienced small church life like that, that certainly does the music director get up there and say, okay, here your part is this and this?
No.
Or do people just naturally
No, they just
find
know.
their place?
They just know. Well, I mean, we're singing the same, 15 songs my entire life. So
except for the Sunday nights where it's choose your hymn, right?
Well, yeah, but they would always choose the standards. I mean, there was
so it's the same
there were
15.
the gold standards that you would sing. And no, my uncle was the for a large part of my childhood was the music director. He had very little formal training in that, but he was one of the guys. He was willing to. He sang and he was willing to be up there and pick the hymns right before church started. He would have a hymnal. He'd flip through about 10 minutes before service starts and pick. Okay, we're going to do 196, 72, and 53. Those are the songs we're going to do today. And so that was kind of the methodology of.
So
of
in the
picking.
congregation, you just have to find your place. You just kind of have to know your range and find your place.
But I mean, it was very participatory. Everybody was like in it. My dad, and you guys know Roger Russell, the
oh man, he makes his first appearance on the first podcast.
This is the first appearance that he'll have.
Many.
He was in the choir. Oddly enough, Roger Russell in the choir, so my uncle was the music director. My dad was in the choir, and my grandmother played organ. And so
wow,
that was a big part of the team up there. But my dad was in the choir for a while until he got sick. And I don't know how the story goes, and he'll probably have to correct me on this. But
does he listen to podcasts?
This is no, I don't know, not yet. This is the story as I remember it, so it may or may not be true. And but he got sick, and he went to the doctor, and then the doctor told him that he was not allowed to sing in the choir anymore. And my suspicion is that somebody in the church probably got to the doctor and said, "Hey, you got to shut this Roger Russell guy down. He doesn't need to be up there singing anymore." So that was the end. That was the last time I saw Dad up in the up in the choir loft. But yeah, that was kind of my early recollection of Sunday morning church music.
Everybody needs to get used to this pattern. Every story and experience that Blake shares is going to come back to his family roots somewhere here in the Nacogdoches area. Or Roger will make an appearance.
We're just a real colorful family.
Or a significant battle.
Yeah, it's some sort of historical perspective.
Those three things, like your
That's
life
it.
runs through those three filters every
Yeah.
single time.
Yeah, if it doesn't have one of those elements, it's not a good story. So.
We have already checked 2 of those boxes.
Yeah. So we grew up singing Heavenly Highway hymnals or out of the Heavenly Highway hymnal and classic songs, and then of course we'd have the special music, which was always in every service, and it wasn't always planned. Sometimes it was like, "Hey, Billy Bob, will you come up and sing a special music today?"
On the spot.
Yeah, if we had a few people that were real musical, and here's what's funny is that when I was probably when I was in college, I think Ashley and I were dating at the time. My entire adult life I've worked in churches, and then occasionally I'd have a day off, and I would go back home to this church and visit. But man, if the music guy saw me, it was on. I was having to get up there and sing everything that I knew, and so I'd always try to avoid that. And I was like, try to slip in and kind of hunch down in the back pew so that wasn't being seen and wasn't asked to get up there and do special music or something like that. So I didn't want to fall prey to that. But special music was a big deal. I was telling Kendall, this is one of the classic stories. Is my uncle. One day, he was the music director, and he didn't have anybody do special music. He also played guitar a little bit, but guitar in church was not a thing at this church. It was piano and I'd say an organ. It wasn't really. It was a keyboard that my grandmother made it sound like an organ. And but anyway, they didn't have anybody do special music that day, so my uncle had his guitar with him, and he pulled it out, and this is my very first experience with guitar in church music. I didn't even know it was a possibility, He pulled it out and he played Desperado by the Eagles.
There it is.
And, it worked. I don't know if it was maybe based on his life experience. He just really identified with the character in the song Desperado. But that was my very first experience with guitar in church.
What was the church's reaction to singing along?
No, it was a special music. So
you don't sing along.
They just enjoyed it. And I don't even know if many of them realized it was an Eagles song, or they thought, they could have thought my uncle wrote the song.
Did they just think he's a brilliant writer?
Oh, I'm sure, yeah. My uncle got up there and sang it with passion, and he nailed it. It's a great version of it.
Which we came across this fact today. There's an Eagles cover band coming to Nacogdoches here in the next
by the time
weekend. By the time anybody hears this, it has already happened. Yeah. But apparently Don Henley had a semester at SFA.
Yeah, he went to SFA. So if you want to know more details about that, you can look it up on Wikipedia, I'm sure. I think it's if you go to Nacogdoches on Wikipedia, it talks about Don Henley in there.
And if we're wrong, don't tell us.
But I'm pretty sure. There used to be a banner on North Street, and you may have remembered seeing this, that was like Don Henley, and it had like whatever year it was, 1967 or 8 or whatever. I don't know. I'm taking a guess. But so, yeah.
So how do you square what you what you went through in terms of your development musically? Obviously, that plays a huge role in your appreciation for music, but also your appreciation for corporate worship, even on that scale. How does that then pop up in what you're doing now? I mean, how do you see some of those roots in the way that you learn to worship in that scenario? How does that play a role in what you do now?
It was so normal and a part of everything that we did. Were these songs that we sang, and they were so relatable. It talked about the struggles, and a lot of these songs are written. A lot of the songs that are in the Heavenly Highway hymnal, they were written, 100 years ago, or some were written during the Great Depression, and so they spent a lot of them were kind of around this blue collar struggle, work hard, life's tough, but when we all get to heaven, it was kind of this. Yeah. It really kind of. I don't know, it made worship music real. It was identifiable. It wasn't just like this thing that you sang because everybody was singing. It was like you really felt what you were singing because you were experiencing those things all the time, And then that's really when we think about what it means to worship and how that encompasses all of our lives. It's not just singing a song on Sunday morning. We talk about that all the time, but you think about the concepts and the things that we were singing about, and how you could identify and relate to that during the week with whatever you were going through. And so it definitely shapes, and even as the way I'm kind of writing worship music right now, kind of thinking about the perspective of from that perspective and what things that we are experiencing, and directly writing songs that can be relatable by our family,
Yeah, I think I've been interested lately as you've been writing, and for those of you that keep close track on Blake, that he's kind of in this spurt of doing a lot of writing and recording, but one of the things that's been really important to you is in writing these songs that they really capture the community that they come from. Mm-hmm. And I think we saw that with All My Hope. Again, plugging All My Hope. If you want to check that out, go to Apple Music, Spotify, wherever you get your favorite songs. But the idea was that All My Hope really does it does capture, in a sense, the essence of this community, and even more specifically this church. Mm-hmm. And that's been something that you've wanted to do. Is that because of how personal, family, relatable kind of your background was? Is that why that's important to you?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, because even now, 25, 30 years removed from church in that perspective of growing up, like I still, even as I'm talking about it right now, I still see individual faces of people singing and think about their stories and think about what they were going through at those times. And I mean, I right now I'm visualizing a choir loft, and I can see specific people I remember that I've not seen in 25 years, but think about who they are and their stories. And that's really the approach that I'm making right now as I sit down and write music, or even as we're picking songs for Sunday morning. I'm spending a little.
You don't do that like your uncle did?
Yeah, I'm
just
spending
right
a
before?
little bit more time than just right before service, but it's the same concept. It's like, okay, what do we as a family need to sing about? This morning or this week, and it's the same. I think about each and every one. I don't say each and every one of you. I think about a lot of our church body whenever I'm doing that, and especially as I'm writing. And that's really something I'm trying to hone in on. It's as you start worship music, I've always said is one of the most difficult genres to write, because you've got to write something, for one, that's singable, but you also have to write something that's true. You just can't pull things out of thin air. But it also has to be, interesting enough to listen to. So you've got like this 3-part thing that's got to come together. And so I've been trying to kind of pull in, okay, I really want to make it true and relatable, and to many groups of people, not just one group, but at the same time thinking about specific people as I'm doing it. And so it's been a really neat exercise, but it's also been really rewarding, and God's been faithful to kind of reveal those things to me in the words that need to be written and said. I'm excited because I've got a handful of songs right now that we're working on to record, and I don't know if all of them will be used for Sunday morning worship or if some will be used for just individual private worship, but there's a thought and purpose between all of them, and individuals and our family in mind throughout all of it. So I'm excited about that.
So the biggest thing to take away here is that if you ever see Blake in deep thought on a Sunday morning, leave him alone, because what he's trying to do is he's trying to figure out what songs we're going to sing here in the next few minutes.
No, I'm probably trying to figure out when Kendall's going to want us to come back up on stage, most likely, if it's on a Sunday morning.
That's amazing. That's funny. But I remember as a kid, so this was kind of when we were kids, was kind of when this movement of in our church it was called the contemporary service. I think that there's still churches that use that term, but that was kind of a new thing. It was this experiment that was beginning with just alternative instrumentation and different ways of worship. And I remember the church I grew up in Midland. That my dad was a singer in the contemporary worship
the praise
band.
Team.
Yeah, the praise team. That's right. That's what it was called, the praise team. And I just remember as a kid that was an interesting experience. We were in the chapel of this church, not the main sanctuary. That was typically where the contemporary services were banished to. Was the chapels, the smaller areas. But it was cool just seeing. For you, talking about seeing a guitar in worship for the first time, that was some of my experience, and seeing my dad up there leading and singing was interesting. It was formational. I don't have a lick of musical talent at all, but seeing him lead worship was really formational, and still have those memories.
Yeah, and during that time period, there was this term that kind of flew around called the worship wars, and it kind of, it pit these two groups together of traditional and contemporary, of like opposites that can't coexist together. And that's always been something that just really irked me. I just never was satisfied with that, because I grew up with these traditional songs and singing in a traditional way, and I still really love that. But at the same time, God was showing me other ways that we can lead worship and worship together. And I'll never forget, the first time I saw a guitar used in church was my uncle, but the first time I ever saw a worship band, I went to a church camp that I kind of got my arm twisted to go. I really didn't want to go. I'm not the church camp type of guy all that much. I'd prefer to be by myself in the woods somewhere. But I went to church camp, and there was this worship band there, and they were loud. They had the drums and the speakers, and it was electric guitars, and at the time I was a teenager, and I was getting into playing guitar and kind of experimenting with that and listening to like the Eagles or CCR or Leonard Skinner or something. And
watch out.
I never thought that those worlds could ever intersect, and I remember the youth volunteer that was there with us. he saw me standing at the back of the auditorium when all the rest of the kids were like right up on the speakers losing their hearing. I was kind of at the back with my arms crossed, like, I don't know about this, and he walked up to me and he pointed me to a verse in Isaiah, and the gist of it says, I will sing with stringed instruments all the days of my life in the house of the Lord. And I kind of read that and was like, so I can do this. I have this passion of music and playing guitar, but I've never really figured out what that was for and why that was the case. And that was kind of, that moment began my journey in the ministry, and specifically using my music to minister to the church. So, yeah.
And that's still going on?
I'm still using a stringed instrument and doing it. So.
Today, yeah, that's right. We used to have a pretty, what I thought was a pretty funny joke. We used to, every time anybody from Fredonia Hill got together, Blake's stringed instrument.
There was a guitar that came out.
Yeah, there was always a guitar. So we said, where there are two or more gathered, Blake's guitar is in there. In their midst. I think you've brought up an interesting topic. I want to close our first episode with the special music. So everybody who's been around church for very long has a good special music story. Either a disaster during special music, or whatever it is. There's a good church special music story. Do you have any good church special music stories? Any that you can share to the wider public?
Oh man, this is not specifically a special music story, but it falls along the same line. So after I came back from that church camp, the first thing that I did, I was 16 years old. The first thing I did is I got my other two buddies that played guitar, and we started a band.
It's time to start a band.
We got to start a band, and we wanted to be a Christian band. We want to make Christian worship music. That was the idea. We got one of my buddies' little brother played drums, and that's a loose term. He got a pair of a drum kit for Christmas, and he could hit it. That was pretty much the extent of it.
He qualified.
He could make sound, and so we needed a gig. And the youth were doing a Valentine's Day fundraising banquet at the church in the gym, which great,
known for great sound,
great sound, great acoustics in the gym. And so we practiced for months and picked out 3 songs. And one was like one that was on the radio at the time, which didn't.
As I said, do you remember what they are?
Yeah, I do remember. One of them was called "One of These Days" by FFH. Another one was a classic worship song, "In the Secret," and then the last one that we had, we were kind of like the pre-show for the actual banquet itself. The last one we had was a song called "We're Hungry," and it was a worship song, pretty popular back then. Yeah. And I'll never forget, we get to the chorus to this song, and we just start saying, "We are hungry," and all of a sudden the doors of the kitchen bust open, and they just start pushing out carts full of spaghetti, and I just about lost it as I was singing.
Did they think that was the cue?
I guess they thought that was, that was divine timing. It was the Holy Spirit, and so that was our very first gig as a band. We were called In the Sun back then.
In the Sun.
With S-O-N.
But in all seriousness, your second band, which was called
Almost There.
Oh, I knew it. I was going to.
That was a spin-off of In the Sun. It's a lot of the same guys.
That's right.
Moved over. We combined 2 bands and made that.
So Almost There. So listen, ladies and gentlemen. Not only can you get All My Hope on Apple Music and Spotify by just searching Fredonia Hill or All My Hope, you can also find some hidden.
Yeah, it's not under that name.
It's not called Almost There. You got to know what you're looking for.
Almost There was too Christian of a name. Every time we went somewhere, people would say "Almost Where," and so we just got tired
terrible.
of that. So
for those of wanting to take a deep dive into Blake Russell bands, tell them how to find some of the Almost There recordings.
So there was a project that we recorded towards the end of our years playing, and we were probably, by the end of our years, I was probably 20. The other guys were probably 17, 18 at the time in the band. We recorded a project down in Houston, and by the time we finished it, those guys were moving off to college. I had decided that I didn't want to be a Christian rock star, and so we never released the album until a couple months ago, and we retitled it as The First Revival. The album title's 2005 because that was the year that it was supposed to be released. And so, so it's out there. It's on Spotify and iTunes and Apple Music, all that good stuff, called The First Revival.
The First Revival.
Mm-hmm.
That's amazing. So you did not know that when you turned on this podcast that you were going to have access to that gold mine, but there it is. That's for free. You can just run over to one of those places.
Yeah,
and
or
grab
YouTube.
that
I'm sure if you dig around YouTube, you can find some audio of that too.
There we go. So yeah, let's call it. Let's say that's a wrap. We've heard some of Blake's background. That maybe in part 2 we're going to jump into some of my background. I've got some funny stories about growing up a Methodist kid. I was an acolyte in the.
I don't even know what that means.
What that means. That means you light the candles.
I was a missionary Baptist. We didn't do all that stuff.
No, you got to wear the robe and you've got to bring in the light to start the service. It was a big deal. I actually met. This will be maybe a teaser for the story. I actually met. He wasn't then president, but who eventually became president, George W. Bush.
Oh, I've got a George W. Bush story too. I'll have to share that too.
We'll just have a George W. Bush episode. So, as an acolyte, met George W. Bush at First Methodist in Midland, Texas, which was interesting. So we may dive into that a little bit. Who knows? This podcast may not last more than one episode, so you may never hear that story. But thanks for listening, and let us know what you want to hear, what interests you. We'll see what that looks like. But for now, we'll see you soon.